Popper's Penguins by Richard and Florence Atwater. I'm Michelle. I'm the Children's Librarian at the Sheridan County Public Library System, and this is another edition of Bookmarks. And this is an all-time wonderful book about a man and kind of a hobby that got a little out of control. And it starts out like this. There's a great picture. Pictures are done by Robert Lawson. He likes drawing penguins. And it starts out like this. It was an afternoon in late September in the pleasant little city of Stillwater. Mr. Popper, the house painter, was going home from work. He was carrying his buckets, his ladders, and his boards, so he had a rather hard time moving along. He was splattered here and there with paint and calamine, and there were bits of wallpaper clinging to his hair and his whiskers, for he was rather an untidy man. The children looked up from the play to smile at him as he passed, and the housewife, seeing him, said, "Oh dear, there goes Mr. Popper. I must remember to ask John to have the house painted over in the spring." No one knew what went on inside Mr. Popper's head, and no one guessed that he would one day be the most famous person in Stillwater. He was a dreamer. Even when he was busy smoothing down the paste on the wallpaper or painting the outside of other people's houses, he would forget what he was doing. Once he painted 3 sides of a kitchen green and the other side yellow. The housewife, instead of being angry and making him do it over, had liked it so well she made him leave it that way. And all the other housewives, when they saw it, admired it too. And so pretty soon everyone in Stillwater had 2 colored kitchens. The reason Mr. Popper was so absent-minded was that he was always dreaming about faraway countries. He'd never been out of Stillwater. Not that he was unhappy. He had a nice little house of his own, a wife whom he loved dearly, and 2 children named Janie and Bill. Still, it would have been nice, he often thought, if he could have seen something of the world before he met Mrs. Popper and settled down. He'd never hunted tigers in India, or climbed the peaks of the Himalayas, or dived for pearls in the South Sea. Above all, he'd never seen the poles. That was what he regretted most of all. He'd never seen those great big shiny white expanses of ice and snow. How he wished he had been a scientist instead of a house painter in Stillwater, so that he might have joined one of the great polar expeditions. Since he could not go, he'd always been thinking about them. Whenever he heard about a polar movie was in town, he was the first person at the ticket window, and often he sat through 3 shows. Whenever the town library had new books about the Antarctic or Antarctica, the North Pole or the South Pole, Mr. Popper was the first to borrow it. Indeed, he'd read so much about polar explorers that he could name all of them and tell you what each had done. He was quite an authority on that subject. His evenings were the best of all. He could sit down in his little house and read about those cold regions at the top and bottom of the earth. And as he read, he could take the little globe that Janie and Bill had given him for Christmas before and search out the exact spot he was reading about. So now, as he made his way through the street, he was happy because the day was over and because it would end in September. When he came to the gate of the neat little bungalow at 432 Proudfoot Avenue, he turned in. "Well, my love," he said, sitting down his buckets and ladders and boards and kissing Mrs. Popper, "the decorating season's over. I have painted all the kitchens in Stillwater. I have papered all the rooms in a new apartment building in the street. There's no more work until spring, when people want their houses painted." Mrs. Popper sighed. "I sometimes wish you had a kind of work that lasted all year instead of just from spring until fall. It'd be very nice to have you at home for a vacation, of course, but in a little hard to sleep with a man sitting around reading a book. I could decorate the house for you." "No, indeed," Mrs. Popper said firmly. "Last year you painted the bathroom 4 different times because you had nothing to do. I think it was enough of that. But what worries me is the money. I have saved a little, and I dare say we can get along as we have winters. No more roast beef, no more ice cream, not even on Sundays." "Shall we have beans every day?" asked Janie and Bill, coming in from play. "I'm afraid so," Mrs. Popper said. "Anyway, go wash your hands for supper, and Papa, put away that litter of paints because you won't be needing them for quite a while." And that evening, when the little Poppers had been put into bed, Mr. and Mrs. Popper settled down for a long, quiet evening. The neat living room at 432 Proudfoot Avenue was much like the other living rooms in Stillwater, except the walls were hung with pictures from National Geographic magazine. Mrs. Popper picked up her mending when Mr. Popper collected his pipe, his book, and his glue. From time to time, Mrs. Popper sighed a little as she thought about the long winter ahead. Would there really be enough beans to last, she wondered. Mr. Popper was not worried, however. As he put on his spectacles, he was quite pleased at the prospect of a whole winter of reading travel books. With no work to interrupt him, he set his little globe aside and began to read. "What are you reading?" asked Mrs. Popper. "I'm reading a book called Antarctic Adventures. It's very interesting. It tells about all the different people who have gone to the South Pole and what they have found." Now, the book is called Mr. Popper's Penguins. So if you want to find out how come Mr. Popper ends up with penguins in the little town of Stillwater, you'll need to check this book out. And I put a bookmark here because bookmarks are magical things. First of all, it tells the characters to not do anything till I come back to read, and it also tells me just when I need to start reading again. Oh no. He's learning about penguins. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. This is Michelle from the library. Bye.